teach together at the College of Staten Island. And the reason that we were asked to give this webinar is because our area of research is SIFE and students with developing literacy. We are also experiencing online instruction, and so we hope to be able to give you some guidance on that. We also train and coach teachers in language and literacy in the New York City public schools, and so we want to try and help in whatever way we can to give you a little bit of our expertise and have you turn it into your own.
Great. So just if you are new to New York TESOL, we would love for you to join, and we have a Join 2020 code here. You can get the link there. You can also, if you are a New York State TESOL member, you can get CTLE credits for this webinar. And if you've done a number of webinars, I know TESOL has been hosting these for the last 2 weeks. You are welcome to fill out a request for each one. Okay.
Okay, Rebecca, can you hear me okay? Some people are saying that they can't hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay. So if you can't hear me, just make sure that I'm not sure. I'm sorry. We're having a little bit of technical issues. There will be a recording afterwards. I hope you can hear me. I'll try and move my headset, and maybe you can hear me there. Okay, Rebecca?
Okay, yes, let me go on. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we hope to do today, and I know that the sound is not the best, so we're going to try to work through it. So one thing I just wanted to say that I know a lot of you are using Google Classroom. We are doing our best to navigate through Google Classroom, and we've also posted this there just to start out with. We're not going to do a lot with that, but just to show you that you can post presentations and go through there. We are going to discuss best practices for this population of students, and we're going to analyze how to target a skill and develop a language objective. We're also going to model a lesson demonstrating how to meet the needs of adolescent multilingual learners who have developing literacy. We're going to focus on vocabulary, close reading, and a strategy for developing literacy. So first I want to just make sure we are all familiar with the students that we will be targeting in this presentation. And so we're focused on New York State students, and as you know, probably there are about 2.6 million students in New York State. 1.1 million of those students are in New York City. Within that larger group, we have about almost 240,000 English language learners. And even within that group, we have several subsets of learners. And one of the groups that we're going to be focusing on today are students with interrupted formal education or inconsistent formal education. And the state right now identifies about 12,000 of those students, although the measurements for these students are unreliable. So often we encounter students who still have developing literacy, who are adolescents, who are newcomers, that maybe don't have this formal title. We also are thinking about some multilingual learners who have disability, and across the state, approximately there are 58,000 of those students right now.
Okay, so Rebecca and I want to first start out with some evidence-based principles, okay? And we're very focused on what is evidence-based, what research has shown helps our population of students. So the first thing that we need to start with, step one, is it has to be oral-based, okay? These are students who are still developing literacy, yet they are adolescents and they need to deal with complex content. And so like all language learners, we learn through listening and talking. That is the first step to language acquisition. And so when you are designing your instruction, I really want you to think about ways that you can talk to your students online, whether it be live, like we're doing right now, or in a pre-recorded lesson. They need lots and lots of opportunity to hear you speaking and to listen to you, okay? It has to be meaning-based. We're living in an age of the Common Core where we have tried to dissect reading comprehension into these individual skills. So, today we're going to work on main idea and detail, and tomorrow we're going to try and, analyze author's word choice. But when you're learning a language, we really need to focus on meaning. I want you to focus on the content of the story or the topic that you are trying to teach your students, not on a specific skill. We're going to show you how skill and content can be integrated, but focus on understanding. Rebecca, you want to talk a little bit about multisensory?
Yes. Sorry, one second. Let me just go back. So in this multisensory education, we often talk about this when we're developing lessons, and specifically online, we are thinking about visual, and that might include video, that might include a lot of images to look at, oral and oral skills. And this is something that Ingrid was just talking about. We want to focus on the oral language where we're either having students practice speaking or also listening skills. We also do a lot of kinesthetic, hands-on activities. And so that might mean like sorting word cards or doing things where they're actually using real objects. And if we're doing it as an online education, we might have to bring in objects from our personal house and show what we're working with, or have them find things to look at, to feel, and to talk about. So it's important to keep up the multisensory education even through online. Another thing is the home language. And as most of you probably know, it's very important to make connections with home language, allow students to use their full linguistic repertoire, and especially for students who are newcomers to the country. But we specifically want you to be aware of making explicit cross-language connections. And that means not only allowing students to maybe think, pair, share in their home language, but to make explicit cross-language connections like looking at cognates and talking about word order or word sentence structure across languages and how they compare. We also want to make sure that students are getting culturally responsive education. And this is a big topic that everyone's talking about. And so in this lesson, we're going to demonstrate something that's about culture and identity, but not everything culturally responsive has to be about your origin story or your immigration story. We just want to make sure that the skills are embedded in meaningful, engaging content. And so that is something that keeps the students interested.
Okay, the next thing we want to bring your attention to is routine-based instruction. And so when we talk about the burdens of English language learners, they already have three burdens: language, often literacy, and they have to learn content at the same time. Okay, so they don't have the luxury of, let's say, a native speaker of English. They're born and they have 5 years of oral language before they have to learn how to read. Okay, when they enter school, our learners are having to do all three things at the same time. Now, with the current situation, we've actually added a fourth burden to them. They have to now take on technology as well. Okay, and so what we want to try and do, to the extent possible, is reduce their cognitive burden. Okay, so if there is a routine that you're currently using that is working for you, we highly recommend you stick to it and do that routine every single lesson. Then that will enable your learners to be able to predict, what am I supposed to be doing now? Understand that. And then if you want to then go into an independent practice where you can experiment a little bit with new things, that's fine. In terms of review-based instruction, we have to remember that when we comprehend things, whether it's, you know, this webinar or a text that we're reading, we comprehend in a schema. We have to have a schema in our brains that we can relay new information into. And so for our learners, we always want to connect what we have previously taught them into what the new topic is, and have it be connected. And then finally, explicit direct instruction is a huge, huge predictor of student achievement in this population. When a teacher models clearly, gives examples, and offers guided practice, it really, really benefits the learner. As opposed to you know, collaborative group work where the instructions are less explicit, and the focus is more on student learning. Explicit teacher-directed learning benefits our population in particular.
Okay, so we are going to model an English language arts unit. This is from an 8th grade sample about culture and belonging and identity. And we want to just highlight the fact that we are using a grade level text. This is Bodega Dreams by Ernesto Quiñones. And want to emphasize that even if students are not necessarily able to read an entire text, they can still learn a lot from using grade level text and doing appropriate practices for students with developing literacy. So in this case, we are going to show just an excerpt of the text. It's really important that we can still teach the themes and the understanding of the text, do a close reading. And when we recommend, when you are choosing a text, that you can choose texts that have an adaptation to screen that has also been made into a film. So students can also engage in talking about these same themes across the literature by seeing the visual format of it, in addition to reading the text and analyzing word choice and author tone, things like that.
Okay, so in our unit, we have some essential questions. And again, when I talk about schema, I'm talking about the overall architecture of what students need to know and understand to be able to process the content, okay? And so in this unit, we're talking about a young man in 1970s New York City, Spanish Harlem, okay? He's Puerto Rican, and this novel is all about the American dream. And so our essential questions are: how does culture impact your sense of belonging in your community? What factors shape your values and beliefs? And what is the American dream, and to what extent is it achievable for all Americans? And so when you're going through your lessons with your students, I really want you to think about connecting to these essential questions in every lesson to enable your students to start to build up their schema that they're going to need for reading comprehension.
Okay, and to start planning a lesson, we start with getting the standard that we want to achieve, or that we want our students to reach in the lesson. And in this one, we are looking at the ELA standard 8R4 from the Next Generation Learning Standards. And so we're looking at determining the meaning of words and phrases as they're used in a text, including figurative or connotative meanings. So we're going to, in this lesson, focus on the impact of specific word choices on meaning and tone and mood in particular. And one important thing I want to point out, so in order to have a review-based lesson or evidence-based lesson, we also want to have standards-based lessons. So developing our lessons, we have to have strong objectives. So our objectives should come from the standards. So one resource that's important is looking at the bilingual Common Core progressions. So if I look up the Common Core progression for this ELA standard, there are specific linguistic demands that are listed for this. Now, some of them are about identifying words and phrases that have a figurative meaning, the connotative meaning, identifying the impact of a specific word that's repeated throughout the text, and maybe identify allusions to other texts. So these are the kinds of linguistic demands in this standard. And so I will use these linguistic demands to develop my language objective for the lesson. So here are objectives, and you'll see that they both come directly from the standard. So the content objective is students will be able to analyze how specific word choices in chapter 5 of Bodega Dreams impact tone and mood. And then our language objective that we're targeting is that students will be able to annotate text and identify words and phrases that have a connotative meaning and impact the author's tone. So the other important thing to remember is that newcomers who are entering and emerging English language learners can meet these objectives in either their home language or the new language. So we do want to have a lot of possibilities for them to meet the standard in their preferred language, with scaffolding to do it in English as well. This is our basic lesson plan template, and this is probably familiar to most of you. This is probably the way you're all doing lessons. And so we're going to model the basic structure of how we would do this online. We're not going to include the review and warm up, but that is something that would be important in any lesson. You're going to review what was previously learned and do a warm up that's engaging the students in reminding them how to build schema around that topic. Then we're going to build background knowledge. So if there's any additional information that needs to be introduced or specific vocabulary, this we're going to model in our lesson today. And then teacher modeling of the activity. So this is a part where we're doing that explicit teaching and the guided instruction before we break into smaller groups where students can have guided practice that's led by their instructor. So some options for doing guided practice or independent work before we get to individual work. We have for online, you can do small group meetings on Zoom, just have a few students at a time. You can do Google Meet or breakout rooms, or even having because I know that it's very difficult for some students to log in and be online at the same time as for synchronous teaching. We would recommend that you could do a pre-recorded video and have follow-up questions and pauses for students to follow along. So we'll give you more ideas about that as we go along. And then the last thing is the independent practice and assessment. So individuals or small groups can work on shared Google Docs. They can also do handwritten notes, take a picture, and submit that online on the Google Classroom to the teacher.
Okay, so now we're going to go into vocabulary and building schema. And this is probably the most important part of your lesson, because without it, your students are not going to comprehend the text, okay? And so as you can see here, I have given pictures, and that is really a primary way of reaching this population of students. I love pictures for all my students, but for our population of adolescents that we're dealing with, pictures are probably the most important thing, pictures and video, okay? You also can see that I've given some translations in the home language. Now this was for a class of all Spanish speakers, but if you've got multiple languages in your classroom, you might just want to maybe the top 2 or 3 and then have other students look up their own translations, or have the students look up their own translations as an activity. Okay, so now I want you to pretend for a moment that you're my students, okay? And so we're going to do a little See, Think, Wonder. Now, if this were a live class, you might, and you could do it if you had a small enough classroom. You could have your students respond to you in live time. Or if that wasn't possible, just pre-record yourself and then give your students a moment to respond and think about what you're asking them. Okay, so I want all of you to pretend to be my students. We're going to go over some words from the passage from our chapter 5 in Bodega Dreams. And what do you see here in this picture on the upper left? Okay, what do you see? What do you think about this picture? I see a man. He looks like a priest, and he has his hand on the head of the other man. And where would they be? Where do you think they could be? It looks like they're in church, right? I'm sure many of you go to church. So in English, we're saying that the priest is anointing this man, okay? To be anointed. Can everyone say that with me? Be anointed. And the OI in anointed makes the OI sound. Be anointed, okay? In Spanish, it's ser consagrado. Okay, and I want you to think about Blanca, Chino, our main character's wife in our story. Blanca is very, very religious, right? And what does she want the most from Chino? What is her dream? Can anyone tell me? Of course, it's for Chino to go to church with her and also become anointed, convert to her religion. That is what she wishes for most. So religion plays a very, very important part in Blanca's life. Okay, so I want you to think about Chino's neighborhood of Spanish Harlem, and I want you to think about Chino and Blanca's dreams, okay, and how Chino is being pulled between two sides. One side is Blanca and everything that she represents. She wants him to go to church. She wants him to go to college, right? And the other side is Sapo, his best friend, who is trying to pull him into an illegal world. Okay, so let's look at some other words that are going to come up in our passage. Look at the picture of the boy being crushed by the yellow sack of money. Does everybody see that? Can everyone say student debt? Let's say it again, student debt. Okay, that B in debt is silent. We don't pronounce that B. And so as you can see, this boy is sitting under a very, very heavy sack of debt. Debt is when we owe money to somebody else. Look at his face. How do you think he feels about owing this money? He's not happy, right? He's not happy at all. And, you know, why would we take out money for school? Well, because we have to pay for school, right? Tuition. Can everyone say that word with me? Tuition. T-I-O-N makes the sh sound. Tuition, okay? To raise tuition. So sometimes a school can raise the tuition, which means the tuition is going up. You have to pay more money. And so sometimes when we need to pay our tuition, students take a loan from the government. Can everybody look at this picture in the lower left-hand corner? What do you see in this picture? What building is this? Where is this? Yes, it's in Washington, D.C., our capital. This is the Capitol building where Congress makes laws, okay? And sometimes the government will give us money so that we can go to school, okay? But of course, we have to pay back that money eventually. Can everyone say, take a loan? Loan. The OA makes the O sound in loan. Why would Chino and Blanca want to go to school or possibly take out a loan? Well, we know that they want to start professional careers. Can everyone say that with me? Start a professional career. Look at the girl in this picture, the young woman. Where do you think she is? Is she at home or is she in an office? It looks like she's in an office, right? She's wearing a suit. She looks very professional. She looks like she might be on an interview. Okay, so Blanca and Chino want to become professionals. They want to, what does Chino do for a living at the moment? Yes, he's a grocery store clerk, okay? So part of their American dream is making more money and having professions. Okay, let's look at the word in the top right-hand corner. Matchbox. Can everyone say that word with me? Matchbox. Look at my lips when I'm saying the first letter. For M. Matchbox. The TCH makes the ch sound. Do you see two words inside of that word? Who can tell me what are the two words inside of that word? Exactly, match and box. Matches are what's inside of that little box on the right, okay? So that's a word that appears in our passage, and I want us to think about what it might mean. Finally, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, we see two young people on the street, right? And they're kind of fist bumping each other. They're friends. So can everyone say the word street politics with me? Street politics. Very nice. So let's think about Chino and his best friend Sapo. Think about the neighborhood of Spanish Harlem. Is it in the 1970s when the novel was written, is it a very safe neighborhood or is it a dangerous neighborhood? What do you think? What do you remember from what we've read previously? That's right, it's a dangerous neighborhood. And in this neighborhood, it's very, very important to have friends who can protect you, right? So then even though Sapo is doing things that are criminal, that are illegal, Chino still feels like he needs to be with his friend, okay? So street politics. We're going to look at how these words are used in our passage. Okay, let me take a step back now from modeling and just talk to you for a moment. Rebecca, could you go back to the slide just for a second?
Sure.
I just want to comment on just a few things. First of all, I chose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I chose 5 words or phrases, not more than that, okay, because more than that in one setting is going to be too much. Even 5 might be too much for your students. Maybe you need to do 2 or 3. These are words that I chose out of the novel, out of the passage, okay, so these are words my students need to know to be able to access the text. I gave each word a picture, and I didn't just say, okay, our vocabulary word is be anointed. It means to be blessed in church. I took my students into the story. Did you see how I did that? I tried to connect these words to the bigger picture of who Chino is, who Blanca is, who Sapo is, what is the American dream? All right, I tried to connect it to those big ideas. Okay, we can move to the next slide. Okay, so here's our passage. And as you can see, it's a pretty short passage, and we're going to make it even shorter. As Rebecca mentioned before, we want our students to be exposed to rich, authentic literature, but we also have to scaffold for them. So it might be way too much for them to read an entire novel. You might not be able to do it with them. You probably won't. But what we can do is talk about the complex themes that a work of literature represents, and we can choose very important explicit passages in that work that we can represent those themes with, okay? So one of the issues with our students is that they are not fluent readers yet, okay? They need our help to model fluent language. They need our help to get the words off the page for them so that they can try and do it on their own and achieve reading comprehension. So when you're working with your students, I want you to think about multiple exposures to a passage. Once is never enough. They need 2, 3, maybe even 4 on their own times with a passage, okay? So I'm not going to read the whole thing for you, but on our first read, you're going to be my students again. I'm going to start reading, and I'm going to use my pointer to track the text, and all I want you to do is listen. I want you to listen and look at the words as I'm speaking, and I want you to start thinking about our story and Chino and Blanca and Sapo, okay? An anointed? What's that, I asked. Who's I in the story? Exactly, it's our narrator, it's Chino. An anointed? What's that, I asked, letting her think I was interested. Who is her in this sentence? That's right, it's Blanca, right? Chino and Blanca are having a discussion. Someone who will one day, when he or she dies, rule with Christ in heaven for 1,000 years, she said, excitedly squeezing his arm. And this anointed is only 17. 17, huh? I answered, not caring in the slightest. All right, so I won't read the whole passage, but if you were my real students, I would go through the whole passage, read it once through, just so everyone has a chance to listen. Okay, let's move on. Okay. Rebecca, is there anything that you want to add to that?
No, I think the only thing is that, you know, even with students who have developing literacy, even that passage might be too long. You might have to break it down even more. So,
yeah,
as we're doing now. So we would do a little bit at a time, make sure they understand, let them talk to each other. If we were in a classroom, we would let them turn and talk. Online, it depends on if you have a live classroom or if you're doing a recording, but even then you can pause. If they're watching a recording, have them pause, think about it, and then go back and reread.
Exactly. All right, so now, as you can see, I took the very last paragraph of that little passage because I just wanted to focus on Chino in his bedroom at this pivotal moment in the novel. And in our second read, I'm now going to give students an assignment. And the assignment is, I'm going to reread the text and they're going to follow along. And when they hear one of our vocabulary words, they are going to copy it down in their notebook, okay? Now, there's a few ways you could do this. If your students have printers, which many of them don't, but if they do, you could send them a PDF file and have them print this out and be prepared with it so that they could track the text with you and underline. If that's not a possibility, which it's not for many of our students, simply have them with their notebooks copy down, okay, the word or phrase, and then the home language translation, okay? So all of my students, you're my students now, everyone, your notebooks are ready, your pens or pencils are ready to copy down vocabulary. You're gonna listen. When you hear one of our vocabulary words, you're going to copy it in your notebook, okay? And then quickly write your home language translation if you know what it is. Okay, we're gonna start from the beginning. In the dark, I looked around our tiny bedroom. Our living room was even smaller. The kitchen sat in the corner. The rent was high for this matchbox, and Blanca and I had our tuition raised last semester because of the new governor. All right, so I just want to take this text apart for you just a little bit. In the dark, I looked around our tiny bedroom. Okay, our living room was even smaller. How do you think Chino is feeling right now about where he lives? How do you think he's feeling about his apartment? Okay, do you think he's feeling good or do you think he's feeling not so good? The rent was high for this matchbox. So the word matchbox, what is it referring to here? Can anyone tell me? Yes, he's talking about his apartment where he lives. He's calling it a little matchbox, okay? The rent was high for this matchbox, and Blanca and I had our tuition raised last semester because of the new governor. Okay, so Blanca and I had our tuition raised. What's another way we could say that? Who can paraphrase? It means we had to pay more money for school, right? We didn't want to take out loans and have to pay the government back for 20 years in debt. Okay, so does Chino want to take money from the government or not want to take money? That's right, he does not want to take money. Why? Who can tell me? Well, because he doesn't want to owe money for 20 years, right? So we were paying for all our studies at full tuition out of our own pockets. Okay, I'm going to stop there and just reflect for a moment. As you can see, again, I'm reading aloud to my students. Now, if we were in a live classroom, I would want my students to be working in pairs, reading to each other, not just hearing my voice. But under the present circumstances, what's more important, they need to hear the text multiple times, okay? So you can see that not only am I pausing and paraphrasing, okay, I'm also pointing out some of the vocabulary, okay? And at the end of this reread, I'm going to ask my students, okay, now everybody, I want you to write a few phrases or sentences in your notebook. What happened in our passage? How does Chino feel? What is he thinking? I want my students to be able to summarize for me what happened in this passage. Okay, even if they can't write full sentences, it doesn't matter. If they can write a few phrases, if they can tell me orally what happened, if you have a live class, okay? Summary is very important for comprehension. Can they summarize the information before we move on to analysis? So as you can see, not to repeat myself too much, but I am not going to jump into analysis. I am going to really hold their hand and make sure they understand the text before we move forward. Rebecca, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Right, just that also any notes they're taking, they can be doing this in their home language or in any way, you know, that's comfortable for them. They can speak to somebody if they have a sibling or somebody in the room. They can turn and talk to them about what they're learning. So there are a lot of opportunities for that as well. It doesn't all have to be writing sentences in English. Are you ready to move on?
Okay, let's move on to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so what we need to do now is we've thought about everything that's happening in our story, and we've thought about some specific vocabulary words, but now we want to look at our story again, our passage again, and we want to understand, what is the author feeling about Chino? Why is the author writing in the way that he is about Chino and everything that's happening to Chino? How is the author trying to make us feel right now? So we call this author's tone, right? When we write something, we want our readers to respond, right? So is the author being optimistic or pessimistic? Is the author being determined? Like, I'm going to do this no matter what? Maybe the author is feeling angry and wants us to feel angry and understand that he's angry too. Maybe the author is anxious, right? And we should also feel anxious. Maybe the author thinks it's funny and wants to make us laugh. Okay, so we're going to reread the passage now, and we're going to think about how the author wants us to feel. Okay, what the author is thinking. All right, so let's read this one more time. And this is what we're going to do. I'm going to read this, and as I'm reading, I want you to write down any words that you feel the author is using to make us feel something, okay? So let me give you an example. In the dark, everyone should be looking on the screen and tracking with my pointer. In the dark, I looked around our tiny bedroom. Why do you think the author is using the word tiny? Tiny means very, very small. How do you think Chino feels? It's a question I asked you earlier about his bedroom. The author is using the word tiny. Maybe the author is trying to tell us that Chino doesn't feel good about his bedroom. Chino is maybe ashamed of his bedroom. Okay, let's continue reading. remember, you're supposed to be writing down words that you think the author is using to make us feel something. Our living room was even smaller. The kitchen set in the corner. The rent was high for this matchbox, and Blanca and I had our tuition raised last semester because of the new governor. All right, I'm going to stop there. Rebecca, do you want to talk about the highlighted words?
Sure. So in this example, we just highlighted some of the vocabulary words that we had already gone through and some of the words that we want to focus on or want our students to pay attention to as they start to think about the author's tone. So remember, if you go back to our standard, which was looking at specific words that have a connotative meaning. So these particular word choices that the author has used or has chosen indicate the kinds of the tone that he wants to get through. So in this case, we decided to highlight the words for our students, even though they're supposed to be reading them and writing them down. This is just another visual representation of how to get the students to pay attention to those particular words.
Right, so depending on your students, this highlighting might actually be a scaffold. If you feel that they're not ready to do this on their own, then you're going to highlight it like we did, and then walk them through it step by step, get them to think about each word. If you think they're already ready to identify the words on their own, then you don't need that scaffold, right? Just no highlighting. Okay. So that would be a third reading, okay?
Also, this reading could be done as a choral read.
Yes,
is that how you
exactly.
had intended it? Right.
Exactly. Thank you for reminding me. So actually one thing I left out that was very important, I'm sorry, is that for this third reading, I really wanted my students to read aloud with me, okay? And so if you have a live class on Zoom, you're gonna have to mute everybody if you can do that. If not, have your student read aloud on their own. In the dark, I looked around our tiny bedroom because this is where we want our students to practice getting the words off the page on their own.
Even if they're watching it as a recorded video, you can prompt them to read it along with you as you're reading, and you read slowly and have them try to get them to read along as they're listening. Do you want to move on? Or?
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. So after the choral read guided by the teacher, students will then be directed to do their independent practice. So this is following our lesson plan. And then during the choral read, as Ingrid had pointed out, students will have worked together to identify the words and phrases that denote the author's tone. And some of this, in our example, we had it highlighted there. And as Ingrid said, maybe your students don't need it as a scaffold to have it highlighted. Maybe they'll find other words in addition to those, or maybe you'll just show a few examples as a model. And then, so they will have already found some phrases and some words that are indicative of the author's tone. And then they will be writing these down in their notebooks, or if they have the actual text, they can underline it or highlight it in their text. And then we have created a worksheet that they can use. So we put this here in our Google Classroom. And so it's created as a Google Doc, and if they go into their classroom, they'll see it here in the materials. They can open it themselves. And so we have it here. So they are going to, their instructions are written here on the document, but we can also orally go over it with them before they start. How is the author making me, the reader, understand how he feels? What words is he using to create a mood? The author's mood makes me, the reader, understand what the author is feeling. So identify 3 different words or phrases. So this is what the students are supposed to do. And then identify the author's tone. What do you, the reader, think the author feels about what he is writing? Okay, and so we again show the images that indicate the author's tone to go with the new vocabulary words that we already introduced. And so here they have a little worksheet, and we have an exemplar to start them off with tiny bedroom, and we'd already gone over this in the text. So one of the phrases that the author used was tiny bedroom. And here we've given them a sentence. We will give them a sentence stem. The author uses the word tiny to make the reader understand that Chino is worried about not having enough space for the baby. The author's tone is anxious. So Ingrid, do you want to add anything to?
Yeah, I was just going to say I added, so it really depends on your students, and maybe you want to give different students different scaffolded worksheets. Maybe some of them don't need a sentence stem. Maybe some of them do. Maybe some of them need a word bank, right? And so you really want to get creative with your worksheets, with hopefully not, you know, doing too much work, but maybe once you get used to maybe just trying one new thing at a time, it's going to get easier. And so we just want to make worksheets super clear, super explicit. We want, definitely I will make that worksheet available. Someone's asking. We'll also make a lesson plan available. So in case you want to use this lesson and adapt it to your text, and a presentation. So yeah, worksheets, we want it to be short, clear, scaffolded, okay? Yeah.
Right, I was just going to say, and if some of it needs to be in their home language, we could provide that as well. So part of going back to the idea that there should be routines in the lesson, students should be used to knowing what kinds of supports they'll have and where to find them. So they might have their own personal word wall that they already have with their home language translations for some of these words. They might have, or for sentence starters and sentence stems, they might already have we might be able to give them an entire sheet of different images that correspond with author's tone. So things that you can pre-make that you can use over and over are useful, and students know exactly where to go to get them and how to use them. So that's all part of that routine. The other thing is that Ingrid mentioned is very important, is that not all students need the same kind of scaffolds. So in this case, we're showing some sentence stems. We have one exemplar there, one example, but some students might need the sentence starter in every box for them, or they might need a little bit more support. So there are a lot of different things that you can do.
I was also going to say, I just want to make one more point, and we have time for this, is that handwriting is more valuable than typing. Okay, handwriting is a multisensory activity. When we are writing something with our hand, we are creating neurological pathways to sound and vocabulary in the brain. And so you can ask your students to use their notebooks, write down whatever it is that they can, take a picture and send it to you, or upload it if they know how to do that, if you can show them how to do it on the classroom, so that you can just see pictures of what they've written in their notebook and assess them that way. Like I said, if they have a printer at home, they can print out the worksheet and write it by hand instead of typing on a Google Doc. But if Google Doc is working for you, then by all means, just continue. I just wanted to add the point about the importance of handwriting, the importance of phonemic awareness, everything that I was doing in the vocabulary slide, having them look at my mouth when I'm pronouncing a symbol, pointing out vowel teams to them, pointing out prefixes and suffixes to them, and compound words. That is all highly, highly critical for this population of learners.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. So we chose to look at author's tone in this text, but we could have done the same kind of thing and focused in on cognates, or we could have focused on morphemes and done a worksheet that looked at those kinds of word choices as well, or those kinds of word study activities as well, to develop more vocabulary awareness and word study skills. And there are a lot of different things. So this is just one model for a number of different things that you can do. And so I just wanted to add that our presentation, we really just didn't want to make this too complex technologically for our students, because if you remember, most of our students are already struggling with a new language, they're developing literacy, they're adolescents, they have a lot of other worries at home. And so we're trying to reduce the cognitive load by getting them to engage with the content in the simplest way and trying to keep, maintain some kind of structure that we had already developed within the classroom with them. Some of the same routines, we're reading together, we're discussing with partner, we're reading chorally, we're looking at doing a close read. But if you feel that your students are ready to take on a new technology, there are a number of other ways you can do it. And I know that some of the other webinars this week from New York State TESOL have focused on some of these things. And so I wanted to just bring up two that I know work really well, and I've seen students use them before. And these are really good ones for specifically oral language, so a lot of SIFE and a lot of students with developing literacy are still not used to typing or even handwriting things, especially in English. If they're developing the English writing system for the first time, they don't have those skills. They're more comfortable in oral, and we want to really strengthen that oral language. So Edpuzzle is one where you can do a lot of work with videos. You can record yourself doing a video. You can choose from a selection of pre-made videos. It's compatible with YouTube. You can edit the videos. You can have them stop and pause and have students answer questions. They can add comments. Students can create their own videos and do voiceovers to videos. So there are a lot of resources that way. And you can have your whole roster of students involved in that. And the other one that I wanted to highlight is Flipgrid, which is also all oral. And it's a nice way you can create a whole topic for discussion, and you have all your students up in a little grid, all their little videos. The default time for creating a video is 90 seconds, but you can go anywhere from 15 seconds to 5 minutes. So say we wanted to create a topic for discussion about this chapter, I can say, okay, so what do you think the author's tone was in this chapter? I can create a little video of myself, and each of the students can respond with a 15 seconds oral discussion of what they felt as well. And straight from the app, you can create these videos, so they don't need a lot of other technology to do it. So that is just something else to keep in mind, that is a little bit more tech involved, but it's less less dependent on the actual writing, which is important for this group. Okay. So I hope that you enjoyed our webinar. Thank you for coming. So we used Google Classroom. Most of you, we didn't do a lot with it, but all of these things were posted through Google Classroom. We showed you how to model, we modeled standard-based objectives and strategies for close reading. And we also chose a culturally relevant grade level text, and we adapted it for multilingual learners who have developing literacy. And we showed you how to do a follow-up activity for independent practice on word choice. So
the webinar is recorded, and we will provide a recording for you if you want to share it with other colleagues and friends. Any questions? If you want to join TESOL, by all means, if you need CTLE credit, Any questions you can direct to Rebecca's email, rebecca.curinga, CURINGA, at csi.cuny.edu.
Go back to,
to the front. We'll go back to our
slide.
title slide.
Yes.
And I also want to mention my website, which is able.com, AEBLL.com. I provide a lot of resources and information for teachers. You can see me modeling in a live classroom. I'll post the recording of this on my website. And you can also email me at ingrid.heidrick@able.com. Anyway, thank you very much. Can you type your website address here? Yes. Oh, you mean in the chat? Okay, that's yes, I can do that. Hold on. Hold on a second, sorry. Yes, I will type it here. AEBLL.com.
I just put it in there.
You just put it in there, thank you. And my email is ingrid.heidrick@able.com. And then Rebecca, is your email in there? Yes,
I just put it in there.
Great. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate your time. We know how incredibly stressed out and overwhelmed you are. Everyone is just trying to do their best right now. So be kind to yourself, stay safe and healthy.
Yes.
And by
also,
all means, yeah.
You know, as you know, your students are also overwhelmed. So please, you know, try to keep it simple as much as possible and engaging, and just let everybody have the space they need. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great weekend, everyone.